don't you whenever I get out? Sarah, maybe.
I have accepted the reality of the world.
Hi, how are you? Oh, I keep getting these electric shocks every sparky person. No, I just didn't tell that I spoke to Cynthia and they have stayed and so just go ahead and spend it.
So they gave it to us, so it's in our bank account.
It's been since December.
Okay, I didn't know if they actually had sent it.
Yeah, I forwarded it.
Oh, maybe.
Look, and now I don't know. So it might not have gotten. And I deleted everything from my other mind. Can I just anyway, I didn't find it, but I called them and then I spoke to Steve.
I believe them.
Yeah, and I said that go ahead. No, because Ellen.
Oh, Ellen, yeah.
She even emailed me saying that that your progressive caucus money is now with us. Congratulations, because that transferred the funds.
Okay, great.
The thing is, I need to get it reimbursed. My bill, $107.
You need to get that reimbursed.
Which was today I was like, where is it? I found it, and the other bills like even they posted and all. I can't find the bills, but forget it.
You can. There is a section where like you don't have the bill, and if it's something that like you need not approval, but you need to have someone else like a second person. You should get paid back for that, please.
I would never know that.
We have a ton of money, but this one is.
No, but
I was in the second time in there.
like a 5 grand. But he has written a lot of cast. His passport was impounded because the government took it away and gave it back to him. Now this government gave it back after 20 years or whatever. Now he's ready to travel.
Sorry.
He's a lot of things to sold in US, like black cast and he's like talk about anti-communism, anti-Marxism and how they're so I thought it would be good for progressive caucus to have some come.
You're sick, right? That sounds awesome to me. If he's coming around, you can't fly him.
No, because he's a journalist, I would like to speak to media and totally and get more fun from houses and I need is an editor of
Press politics and press coverage.
yeah, because he is the editor of a journal, a magazine called Dalit Boys. Dalit is a socially backward class of caste in India, which is like who's the most marginalized, don't have access to resources, who are like untouchables, who are killed because they are low caste, the upper caste freedom, they're politically, socially, totally marginalized. And you don't get to hear this part because those people who come to power are elites and upper caste. So, and he's talking about how about the whole identity and if you have to really how if this cast has to really come out and there has to really grow to like there has to be in one. So it's kind of very interesting to have those two incomes. So I was thinking if progressive causes
I'll look at the budget again too, but between press politics and then the houses are not really
I'll do some talks with them this week or next week and we can imagine sometime.
Yeah, probably before their first week event. That's the last one.
emailed him to the, I met him like years ago, 3 years ago, so I know his son, I don't know, he's like 17 years old now. So, but I'll call him up and speak to him and all that, and it was like fine.
At all viable, then
And we
yeah.
can make see how much the ticket and the cost of living is here and that cost. So, I thought that was a good perspective.
No, I know. I know exactly.
It's a different perspective. Yeah, we might. Yeah.
All right, great. See you later. Which I think is I almost thought you would cut your hair. It looked like it was like
Oh, I know. I'm going to though. I'm sick of it spinning like because you want that minute. So I was thinking about that today. I almost ran over to the clinic. Yeah.
real life.
Everything was the clinic reason. Thing of the day. I'm gonna grab a spot from Rita.
No, I assumed that she was going to be down in the front, like they had safe seats.
Save seats, yeah. Oh, there's. Oh my gosh. You must have sat down.
All right.
Hey, I'm so sorry. I missed you.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Oh, yeah, no, I can't believe I just slept right through it. Because every night I'm flying to South Africa. So last night I went to bed at 3 in the morning. Last week I was 4 or 5 in the morning. And then, which is fine actually, on Tuesday and Thursday, or the night before Monday, Wednesday I have 10 time class. So
Dude.
just, it was like cumulative sleep loss. Not nearly as bad as last year. But bad.
All right. Well, I'll come by you guys afterwards.
Entonces, tienes que ver bien para
So you get a lot of exposure out there.
Ahora, estos proyectos tú los puedes hacer. Y tratas de... No, que tienes que meter en riesgo tu negocio. Pero puedes saber, la que uno necesita para que si no te la gastas. Pues que ahora sí es como sea en Colombia,
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. My name is Eric Yazdani, and I'm with the Social Club at Kennedy. That's a little better. I wanted to start by first thanking all the speakers, guests tonight for coming. We're very pleased to have a wonderful group here tonight. They've all been very innovative in the way they've applied social entrepreneurship. And they also have very different backgrounds and slightly different organizational settings from which they've approached social entrepreneurship. So thank you very much for being here tonight. I also wanted to thank the other student clubs that were instrumental in putting this together, the Corporate Responsibility Council and the Center for Business and Government, PIC. This event initiated last semester, actually, when SEA, the Social Enterprise and Action Club, started looking for events that would bring practitioners and social entrepreneurs to campus. We talked to a lot of different centers around Kennedy, particularly the Center for Public Leadership and the Hauser Center for Nonprofit Organizations, and discovered there's really just a lot going on in social entrepreneurship this semester as well as kicking off next year. And so it's a great time for a student to be interested in social entrepreneurship at Kennedy. The SEA speaker series that we've organized and the Social Enterprise and Action Club has really two purposes, which I think relate a lot to what the speakers will talk about tonight. The first is providing an opportunity for students to look at the management challenges of founding and building a social enterprise, and really getting some real life experience with practitioners. The second purpose is sort of a broader societal issue, and how social entrepreneurship impacts society. If you think of government basically being a top-down mechanism for bringing about positive social change, social entrepreneurs are, in essence, a bottom-up mechanism for bringing about positive social change. And really, they are the ones who can empower citizens to take greater ownership and responsibility for the problems that individual citizens see in society. So we're really pleased to have all of them here tonight, and I'll start by introducing our moderator for the evening, David Gergen. David Gergen is a professor of public service at Kennedy and also director of the school's Center for Public Leadership. He's editor-at-large for U.S. News and World Report, and his career prior to Kennedy is, of course, well known to many here, but he was an advisor to 4 presidents, Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Clinton. He's also a frequent commentator on various news shows, including a 5-year stint with Mark Shields on McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour. He's also very active with nonprofits and serves on the boards of numerous organizations, including City Year. And here at Kennedy, he's a huge supporter of social entrepreneurship, so we're very pleased that he was willing to moderate the panel tonight. So thank you, David.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you. Thanks very much, Eric, and thank all of you for joining us tonight for this forum and what I hope will be a series of conversations about social entrepreneurship that will extend well beyond this year into next year and the years beyond that. I think that all of us have learned a great deal, have had our eyes opened in the last few years, not only by the success, but by the vitality and the idealism of the pioneers in this field, and the recognition that it's time for everyone, including this school, this university, to take this issue much more seriously, and to recognize that we can make a difference by working with the social entrepreneurs who are in our midst already, many of them in this region, but also by trying to understand this phenomenon, and also by trying to work with the students of the classes that are ahead of us to prepare them, if they wish, to enter this field. I've been enormously taken. We talked with Suzanne Gelsing, and I've talked about the clubs that have formed here. Just the last 2 years that we've had these social enterprise clubs here at the Kennedy School, which have become the most rapidly growing clubs at the school, I think over the last 2 years. This weekend, or 10 days ago, there was a conference over the business school, co-sponsored by the students of this school and by the club over there at the business school, that had some 600 to 700 people there for the weekend. And last year there were a similar number who were there. It's clear that there's an awful lot of student interest. We have also been working with a number of students through the Hauser Center and through our Center for Public Leadership on how much, how far they want to drive this. And there was a big student survey last year of KSG students saying, we'd like more courses here, we'd like more skill building, we'd like more help. It goes to preparing people for this, bring social entrepreneurship more deeply into the school. Partly in response to that, we have been working with a donor, Betsy Myers, who is here, and I and others have been working along with President Summers. I want to underscore that. He's been very active on this front. I've been working to bring forth a scholarship program that many of you may know about that's starting next year. It's a $10 million scholarship program that's going to extend over the next 5 years for Kennedy Public Health and Education to provide scholarships and internships and training opportunities for students coming here to one of these 3 public service schools. And we will have our first class entering next fall for these Reynolds Fellowships. The program has not actually been fully announced yet. The official announcement is still coming. This is sort of like the Golden Globe Awards before the Academy Awards has its final nomination. But we're at that stage. But in any event, for these scholarships for next year, we have 20 scholarships available at these 3 schools. The applications are now in. We have over 1,000 applications for 20 scholarships. Now that bespeaks of something that's going on in our society that's deeper and more dynamic and more contagious than people understand. And it's that we want to start having conversations with people who are out on the front lines. So understand what they're doing, and we have 3 of the best who are here and are great friends of this school and are great friends of the social entrepreneurship movement. And they've come here at the request of SEI, Eric led that charge. I'll introduce them very briefly. From my left, my immediate left, is Cheryl Dorsey. She is the president of a nonprofit group called Echoing Green, ECHOING. It took me a while to figure out. I was in these conversations, everybody said, Echoing Green. I said, what? And then I met Cheryl Dorsey. I said, I don't need to know the name of the organization, I just need to know Cheryl Dorsey. She started it, and she runs it, and she's the heart and soul of this operation, and it's a social venture fund. And they've awarded $20 million in startup capital to 370 social entrepreneurs since 1987. They've also launched a company called the Family Van. It's a community-based mobile health unit that provides basic medical and outreach services to at-risk residents of inner-city Boston neighborhoods. She worked in the Clinton administration in the Labor Department as special assistant to the secretary. And listen to these degrees. And they seem in ascending order as far as I can tell. A BA in History and Science from Harvard and Radcliffe Colleges, an MD from the Harvard Medical School, and an MPP from the John F. Kennedy School. She is a pediatrician, I believe. But also, so she's been out there. But Cheryl is someone we're turning to at the school to say, Cheryl, come in and help us build something. And she's kindly agreed to do that. To her left is Alan Casey, an old and increasingly dear friend, who I think is almost legendary here at Harvard. He and Michael Brown were undergraduates. They went on together to law school, and they said, we could practice law or we could make a difference. Was that what you said? I'm sure it wasn't quite that way, right? I don't mean to put down the lawyers in our midst, but anyway, they were inspired. They started a National Youth Service Corps here in Boston in 1988, about the same time Cheryl was getting underway, and it's called City Year. And Alan is the co-founder and now the CEO of this. E.J. Dionne in the Washington Post has written that City Year is, quote, a peaceful revolution against cynicism, despair, and selfishness. They had 150 young people in the first year. It's grown to enlist over 1,000 young people for a full year in full-time community service, civic engagement, and leadership development. They're in 15 cities across the country. They have also been working with President Clinton to take City Year to South Africa. They went over to see Nelson Mandela, who's become a great partner in this effort. And you should know that when President Clinton was in office, City Year was his model for a national service corps, essentially, and that became the foundation for much of what the national service movement is. In the last couple of years, I've watched with great admiration as Alan has personally, when chips were down and the backs of a lot of the AmeriCorps, people seem to have their backs to the wall in AmeriCorps about whether the funding would be cut dramatically and whether a lot of these organizations would be cut to shreds as, in 10 or 15 years of progress will be lost. Alan personally took it upon himself to organize the various nonprofit groups around the country in a variety of different ways in Washington, had these enormously successful push that got the attention of the First Lady, got the attention of others. It should be a case study in how nonprofits can make their voices heard. And he became, in effect, a de facto leader of the nonprofits. They're rotating around AmeriCorps. And he started something called Save AmeriCorps. And if anybody saved AmeriCorps, it was Alan Casey. Alan, we're delighted to have you here, sir. Both of them. Jeff Schwartz. If you, can you stand up? Come up here. Come up here. Come up here. Come up here. Now, come up here on the stage. And hold that right foot up. Hold one of your feet up. Just put it right up here. You see that? Those are Timberland boots. Those are Timberland boots. And where do they come from? They come from this fellow right over here. Jeff Schwartz, as CEO of Timberland, has been enormously supportive of City Year and what they do. And now you tell us, just for 1 minute, about City Year and Jeff Schwartz. Just this is called cold calling. Here, go get him.
Okay, well, Jeff provides everything I'm wearing. Timberland provides us with, about $1,000 worth of uniform pieces so that we can perform our service across the city of Boston and present a united front so that we can wear the City Year name and people know us and people recognize us as working for social justice. And we really appreciate the opportunity to have that united front, to stand out, to wear the Timberland name. It's great. Thanks, Jeff.
That's great. That's great. Okay. Where is Carolyn Casey? Where is she? Here, Carolyn, stand up and tell us just for a moment, if you would, about the Path of Service program at Timberland.
Well, first, I'm a Kennedy School grad, so I want to make sure I say that. But the Path of Service is every employee at Timberland all around the world gets 40 hours as a paid benefit to invest in their community through citizen service. And so in 27 countries around the world, we partner with City Year to transform communities through civic action. And that's just one of our platforms for giving back to the community. And I work for Jeff and Alan.
Terrific. Thank you, Carolyn. So I think you have a flavor of who Jeff Schwartz is. So Jeff, thank you for being here. Jeff, let me just ask you to respond to this. Boston College last week, Chief Executives Club, visited by the CEO of Nestle, who said that companies should not feel obliged to, quote, give back to the community because they haven't taken anything away.
I agree.
He went on to say, is what the hell have we taken away from society by being a successful company that employs people? He thought their company should stay out of this business. Welcome to Milton Friedman. Tell me how you respond as a CEO and what the role of companies ought to be in this social enterprise effort.
Well, I think it's borderline lunatic what he said, and I don't mean that in a respectful, I mean that in a straightforward way. I think it may be the altitude, because it's in Switzerland. Maybe he's been up in the mountains, because down in the trenches of the so-called global economy, our license to be a force in the world of commerce is absolutely predicated, I believe, on our commitment not simply to commerce in an extractive and transactional way, but to the notion, a synthetic notion of commerce and justice. And to those that assert that they are antithetical notions, and I know there's an intellectual case to be made, it simply doesn't bear out in the world of practice. The fact is, the people who work at Timberland have an expectation, and it's not merely denominated in a salary. It is denominated, if you want to have a relationship with people, not merely a transaction. Maybe in the 1950s you could say, this is your cube, this is your job, shut up and do it, and here's a check at the end of the week. But if you want to have a relationship that's creative and generative, a real relationship, there has to be a conversation about values. And I don't understand, honestly, the competitive thinking that goes into asserting that that's not the role or the purview of business. We don't have employees at Timberland. We have human beings who work for the mission that we believe in. You can call them employees in a technical legal sense, but they are people with values. They are mothers and fathers when they walk in the front door, and whether they switch into the role of a marketing person or to an accountant, they're still human beings. And they have, at least in the context of our internal community, huge demands and real expectations that they'll be understood as human beings. Further, it's clear that the arrogance that says, I exist unto myself, this sort of legal fiction of the corporation, it's bankrupt on so many levels, right? I signed off this morning on the Sarbanes-Oxley stuff. That is an incredible response, but the government says if you break the law, we'll send you to jail, which is an incredibly puerile response in some levels. I mean, that's an important innovation. If you break the law, I'll send you to jail. Right? But what about reputation? What about relationship with consumers? In an overserved world, literally there's nobody here. And by the way, I'm checking, most of you have not availed yourself of what we do, and I don't express I'm mildly uptight about that, but I'm gonna get over it. Nobody, it's clear, looking at you, nobody needs Timberland, right? In a moral sense, what we do, boots and shoes and clothes, we care about it. We work hard at it. But your proof text staring me in the face, nobody knows, nobody cares, and nobody needs to. No one in this audience is going barefoot because we failed to do our job. And so if you're well served from a selection perspective, on what basis will you invest your hard-earned money in a brand? I mean, do you care where the product was manufactured? Do you care if the environment was despoiled? Do you care if this corporation, this gathering of human beings against a business mission, is invested in civic change? Well, if you don't, then buy what you will. But there are some, right, citizen consumers who say, I demand not just high quality and low price and good styling, I also expect a different kind of response. I think the nested guy's out to lunch, respectfully.
Terrific. When you think about what's happening now among in the younger generation, what you've been supporting, you were chair of City Year for almost a decade, and you watched this organization grow. You were one of the, I think one of the first times I walked into a City Year board meeting, people were singing, as I recall. I think you were leading them in song. It was a very interesting, different kind of board.
I'm leading them in song.
And there may have been chanting. I can't remember, but it was definitely singing. Well, how much promise do you think this movement has, the social enterprise movement?
I think it is extraordinary on so many different levels. I'm a third generation, right, guy in our business. My grandfather was an immigrant to this country. He was an entrepreneur. My dad was an entrepreneur too. I'm kind of a watered down, overeducated third generation guy, but I still have the nose of an entrepreneur. And that is to say, I can smell the power of purpose. And if you spend time with, and you do, but if one were to spend time with the young people, 15 sites all across the United States, including in our headquarters in New Hampshire, soon to be in South Africa, you look at the power of what happens when a young person stands up for purpose. And you look at, I'm not talking about entrepreneurs now in the sense of Alan, I'm talking about the entrepreneurs in the sense of Kim. Because there's something, right, what is an entrepreneur? Someone, I believe, who stares at the improbable and asserts that they can go right through the improbable to what should be possible, what they see and what they taste. The young people who commit a year of full-time service, whether it's City Year or at Peacemakers or Harlem Children's Home, these are entrepreneurs who absolutely are convicted of the view that they can transform society, sort of one person at a time. Now, I think one huge failure is that we haven't scaled up and made professional enough some of these instincts, these courageous, powerful instincts, because you think about this, interesting challenge for the audience to consider. This year, we're going to sell, Timberland's going to sell plus or minus $1.5 billion worth of stuff, right? Which we agreed a minute ago, nobody needs. Some people want, but nobody needs, right? $1.5 billion, $100 at a time. So I can't do the math, but that's a lot.
105 billion?
1.5 billion.
1.5 billion.
That'll be our revenues. Divided by 100, what's that turn to be? Like a big number, right? I'm the CEO, not the CFO, right? So you're smarter than me. It's a lot of people, right? But think about that. I can get 50 million Americans to reach into their pocket, take out $100 they worked hard to earn, and buy something they don't need. And yet we, as social entrepreneurs, with a passion, conviction, purpose, absolute sense of the way the world must be, we can't get our organizations capitalized, not in financial capital terms, not in human capital terms. There has to be a conjoining of strengths. There's got to be a bringing together of private enterprise thinking and social entrepreneurship genius to create a more powerful business model than we got yet.
Tell me, Cheryl, because I get this question all the time. Betsy and I just went off to a conference with Alan and you and New Paltz, New York, and we've been puzzling. What is a how do you define a social entrepreneur? Are there boundaries around that idea, or is it really inclusive?
That's an excellent question, and I do get it a lot as an organization that seeds social entrepreneurs. And I was telling the students in a reception beforehand that if you ask 6 different people the definition of social entrepreneurship, you would get 4 different definitions. But this is a moment in time where the social entrepreneurship movement is still young enough that the semantics are roiling. We're still sort of determining and codifying the language around it. So what I'm prepared to do is tell you the definition that I use and the definition that Echoing Green starts from. And it really is a personality type, sort of a set of characteristics that helps you identify a social entrepreneur out there in the world. And it comes from the writings of Professor Greg Dees, who wrote a seminal paper back in '98 called The Meaning of Social Entrepreneurship. And basically, he said that, in fact, a social entrepreneur is very much like a for-profit entrepreneur. They are agents of change within their sector. And just like a for-profit entrepreneur stimulates economic progress by finding new and better ways to do things, so too does a social entrepreneur create value in the social sector. And in many ways, they do that by the power of their being. They are passionate. They are relentless. They are dedicated to obtaining resources in areas of scarcity. They do not see barriers where others see many. They are what some people call opportunistic, and I'm using that in a positive way. They are wed to their constituency, and they work hard for those that they serve. And this particular actor with these particular characteristics is an incredible force for change in the social sector. So that's the definition we work from. And often, Echoing Green, that is now seated about 400 social entrepreneurs in 30 countries around on 5 different continents. In some ways, you know a social entrepreneur when you see her or where you see him, and it's an energy, it's a feeling. You are drawn in by their creative potential, by what is possible. And they truly believe that they are going to solve key social problems that others have deemed intractable.
Okay, I have two follow-ups on that. I see Alan Casey as a social entrepreneur. He's very innovative. He's got all these qualities that you described. He's got the passion, the idealism that has inspired so many others. And he's in nonprofit work. I also look at Jeff Schwartz and Timberland, and it seems to me he's not only a CEO of a for-profit company, but I also see him as a social entrepreneur who is channeling his company so he not only does well, but it's doing good. And so my first question is, are for-profit companies that provide social change of a positive nature within the social entrepreneurial ranks?
Yes.
They are?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes,
I feel
indeed.
better.
Yeah.
I feel more comfortable. Okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I feel more comfortable. Okay, now my second question for you is the model of change. When I was first introduced to this, people pointed to me to Billy Shore, who spoke here at the business school here last week. He's a wonderful man and started to share our strength. Came out of politics, great story, St. Billy, as he's called in Washington. And they use entrepreneurial techniques. They go out and sell things in order to raise money for their nonprofit organization. They have the chef nights, for example, where cities, where chefs come from all over the city. You can go there and buy dinner, and you get the best food from all these chefs all over the city, and the money all goes to the nonprofits. Now, I was told he was a social entrepreneur because he was using sort of free enterprise techniques to raise money. But other people tell me, no, you don't have to do that. You just have to be an innovator to be a social entrepreneur in the nonprofit sector. So I'm confused about that issue as well.
Yeah, and actually Billy is one of my board members, so I see him up close doing his work and being a real force for change. I actually would distinguish social enterprise from social entrepreneurship. I see social enterprise, whether it's a for-profit company generating revenues for explicit social good, or a nonprofit that has a for-profit arm that pours revenues back into the nonprofit part of the company.
You see that as social enterprise?
I see that as social enterprise, but I would call Billy a social entrepreneur because Billy, who started a for-profit subsidiary of Share Our Strength called Community Wealth Ventures about 5-6 years ago, his take on revenue generation within the nonprofit sector, to me, is an innovative new way of looking at things. Billy was one of the first nonprofit practitioners who said, wake up, my fellow nonprofit practitioners. What we do, what we generate every day, whether it's serving clients, whether it's opening a bakery that serves the community, is asset creation. It is wealth creation. That was really a new way of looking at nonprofit assets. And it was about calling it community wealth. And as opposed to going to the government or
as opposed to financial wealth?
Yes, community wealth. And financial wealth was part of that, but it was under this rubric of community wealth, truly viewing our services, the way we did our work, our human capital as true community assets that could be monetized, that could be packaged up and considered part of, the greater good. And that was really new. And that was, instead of going as a supplicant to the government, to philanthropic institutions, it was a way of putting down a marker and becoming more equal in a partnership between funders and grantees. And I would say that was an innovative new way at looking at our industry, and for that reason, I call Billy a social entrepreneur.
I see, interesting. Alan, you've been out on the cutting edge of trying to figure out what the relationship should be between government and social entrepreneurs, because with AmeriCorps, obviously, is a government program that subsidizes young people to undertake a piece of this, but you've also got to go out and raise money privately to go with that. In fact, that's a major part of your undertaking, and a lot of your energy goes in. Help us think through that relationship, and then I want to get to the larger challenges you think face the social entrepreneurship community.
Sure. Well, thank you, David. It's great to be here at the Kennedy School, and I see a lot of old friends here. Jude Kidd, who was the first person in Boston to get behind City Year, and Harvard's very lucky to have her, and a lot of other old friends. And the Kennedy School actually was the first real supporter of City Year because we didn't have an office. We were just students, and we came here, and the Kennedy School graciously gave us space to hold meetings, and so it's great to be here in this setting. On the government, I think that there's a subset of social entrepreneurs, and we can get all hung up on definitions, that are using an approach that I like to call the action tank approach to change. And that's sort of what we try to do with CITIA. We're not the only ones. And I think increasingly, people in government, it's so exciting what's happening. There wasn't anything like this when I was a student here. There wasn't anything like this 10 years ago. That people in government are going to look to social entrepreneurs, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, for the new ideas. Even Bill Clinton, a Democrat, said the era of big government's over. Government isn't like it was in the 30s where it was full of innovation. I think the energy and the ideas for change are coming from often grassroots ideas, often from the bottom up, often from social entrepreneurs. And what government can do is look at interesting ideas. When I say action tank, I mean, how do people usually go about change? Well, there are a lot of people in think tanks, and they try to make change by doing policies. And then there are a lot of great, program people who just do their programs. And what the action tank social entrepreneurs are doing is trying to bring those two together. They're trying to do a strong program, but in the light of trying to change policy. That was sort of our strategy with City Year. There was a lot of support for the general notion of national service, but people said, how do you actually do it? And so we said, well, let's just try it and show how you can do it. Wendy Kopp's done something similar with Teach for America in the area of education. Jumpstart's doing it with early childhood. And there are others. So I think what government can do is, A, be on the lookout for social entrepreneurs. But it was also the government, we were entirely privately funded, and it's because of the generosity of people like Jeff Schwartz, and now Bank of America was Bank Boston when Jude was there, and others, that got us launched. We went to the private sector for our venture capital. but it was the AmeriCorps program that actually gave us sort of what you'd call the mezzanine financing to take us from one city and 100 people to 15 cities now and 1,000 people. And I think government has to redesign how it does business and think about, well, what are the innovators? Because Jeff's absolutely right. The big problem is scale. In the past 30 years, 186,000 nonprofits were started, 186,000 in America. Less than 1% have gotten to $20 million in annual revenues over 30 years. So
how many have gotten over $20 million in annual revenue?
In the social sector, and I see Kim Simon, who works at New Profit, they did research on this. In the social sector in the past 30 years, there's only been, is it 20? 21 organizations in the social sector that have gotten to over $20 million in 30 years. So I think what government can do is A, be looking for those action tanks, think differently about how government funding is done so that it can really focus on, too much of government funding, frankly, is done on a political basis. It's all done on population. You know, if you have X number of people, you get X number of money, and it's done on sort of, you know, small grants to sort of spread it around. Government's got to think, how can we scale up the good? There are plenty, Billy's written about this, there are plenty of great ideas happening in America. We haven't figured out the system to scale them, and government has to be a key piece of that.
How do you respond, Jeff? You were just shaking your head about the 20, only 20 have made it to $20 million.
It makes me mildly nauseous if you think about it, because, you know, in the lesser institution where I got my MBA than Harvard, one of the axioms that they used to, you know, to mouth was, you know, all good deals get financed.
All what?
All good deals get financed, and so the capital markets are efficient. And if you got a widget and the widget's got a market, and you need money in order to scale widgets, assuming you have a business model, right? If you have a model that's a sustainable model, we're going to give you capital, and off to the races we go. So just the numbers stagger me, because $20 million, I continue to bring that back into the context of what I do. We sell more than $20 million of this pair of shoes that doesn't fit me as well as it ought to. Right? And it doesn't take me 30 years to figure that out. So what is it about the marketplace mechanism that exists in the world of widgets that we have somehow intellectually failed to root in the context of social entrepreneurship? So when we talk about entrepreneurship, it's a business-esque phrase, right?
Right.
And yet, but when it plays out against a marketplace, you ask yourself the question, well, maybe you have a product that nobody wants. Like maybe really nobody does care about the fact that 1 in 5 children go to bed hungry in America, so that's not a market we're serving. Or maybe it is, and if it's a market we're serving and we have a program like Share Our Strengths, for example, where we state, Billy's on your board, Billy's on Alan's board, Billy's on Timberland's board. The man gets around. Yeah.
We're going to try to get him on our board here at the Kennedy School too.
Outstanding.
He's agreed to come help teach some of our classes next year.
Oh, well, that's a treat. You should sign up to listen to Billy say his thing. But when he signs up for this bold goal of ending childhood hunger, right, he talks about the need to generate revenues and resources to do it. The numbers, frankly, they are intellectually hard for me to understand. 1,000 people, what's our budget now? That's
$40 million.
$40 million a city year. So in the realm of trying to build an organization built to last, we're up to $40 million in revenue. I think of the commercial propositions that go through those numbers in a wink of an eye that simply have no social value. It's an inefficiency that breaks my heart.
Yeah, but Alan, you're one of the largest at 40 million, aren't you?
Yes, but it's still, as Jeff says, you know, against the larger issue, it's still very small. I mean, there are 25 million young Americans in this country between 18 and 25. So I look at the universe of who could be doing City Year. It's 25 million. We've got 1,000. AmeriCorps got about 30,000 people full-time, 75,000 total. So it's a, you know, yeah, we've gotten to some scale within the nonprofit world, but the larger issue, as Jeff said, it's a systems issue, and some of you here are going to help solve this problem, because we have to reinvent a capital market for the social sector. The reason that I believe that America dominates the global economy is because we've advanced the most sophisticated entrepreneurial system anywhere in the world. It's not just that we have the great entrepreneurs. In fact, a lot of them come here to be entrepreneurs because we've got the best system. We have great institutions that train people. We have the most sophisticated capital markets, so you can get, like, there's plenty of venture capital for nonprofits. 186,000 in the past 30 years, so people can get money to get started. The challenge is, where's the mezzanine financing? Where's the equivalent of taking a nonprofit public? How do you build ongoing, sustainable funding for things? How do we, again, New Profit's working on this, other people are working on it, and it is solvable. There's a way to reinvent both what government does and what philanthropy does and what interested people in business do, and I think the real answer is going to come when business people get together with nonprofit social entrepreneurs, added by places like the Kennedy School and what, David, you're trying to do to say, how do we reinvent this system? And then, frankly, sell it to government. Because I think the government's sort of stuck right now. You can see, we spend billions and billions, and we spend, $400 billion a year on the education issue in America, and yet we still say it's in crisis.
And $40 billion to feed children, we send them to bed hungry.
So we've got to figure out how we can reinvent a system to scale up the good ideas and solve the problems.
Yeah, I've wondered whether there are ways, particularly here with this school, we ought to be trying to contribute to making this state, this region, more of a model, so that if you could build it here, you could perhaps then take it elsewhere. That would make a lot of difference, given the kind of energy. We've got the nucleus, we've got a lot of organizations here, we've got the talent. You just got to build something that then can be a model for the whole country and inspire people beyond that. Cheryl, I want to go to the floor here in just a second, but let me ask you this question. We've been talking about how do you bring the venture capital in this? How do you take this to scale, which is one of the looming big questions now. But I also think one ought to start at the fundamentals. Not only what is the social entrepreneurs accomplishing for the people they serve, but talk to us a little bit about the young people who get involved with these efforts. What does it do to their lives? Not only the social entrepreneurs, but Teach for America. When all these kids sign up, young people sign up and go out and teach. The City Year folks, there are a couple of them here on the front row. What does it do for them as well? Because I think that's a very important part of the story.
I think that's right. I'll briefly tell you my story. I mean, I am so used to sitting where you guys are. When I was a student at the Kennedy School, I spent many a night listening to fora just like this and learning so much more here than I ever did in the classroom. Although I love my experience here at the Kennedy School, is not to cast aspersion, but I learned so much listening to people like this while I was a student here. And what social entrepreneurship, and again, it was a term that I don't think we used when we were sort of getting funding from Echoing Green. We talked about it in terms of public service, community service, getting involved. But I think social entrepreneurship is now sort of an identifiable doorway through which idealistic, inspired, motivated young people can sort of begin their pathway on the social justice track. And I mean, I really actually do use social entrepreneurship interchangeably with social justice, because I think at their core, both of these enterprises are about equity. And I just find social entrepreneurship is actually a much more palatable and accessible way to talk about social justice than true social justice activists do. And what I find so fascinating about my role in Echoing Green is it makes for strange but beautiful bedfellows when you've got corporate titans sitting around a table with social justice activists who never have any identifiable kinship, but who are sitting down talking about equity, whether it be educational equity, human rights, civil rights. It has brought together a community that before never talked to one another. So I think that's sort of a powerful morsel that we should not forget, because at the end of the day, it's people still fighting for justice, for rights, but it's sort of packaged in a way that makes it much more accessible and nonpartisan, which I think is very important to keep in mind as we move forward. I also think it's an exciting way to apply and I'm talking about the people in this room, your skill sets, because so much of the success of social entrepreneurship is about talent applied to tough social problems. And in fact, the mindset is that they're solvable. They're tough, but they're solvable. And if we get the human capital right, if we get the organizational structures right, if we celebrate and privilege innovation that will sort of lead to great new approaches to old problems, we're going to figure this out. So I think there's sort of an idealism, and I'll talk about you, Alan. Last year, for the first time, Fast Company did an issue called the Top 20 Social Capitalists and looked at the top 20 social change-making organizations around the world. Alan and Michael from City Year were profiled, but what I liked as the president of Echoing Green, that 5 of the 20 organizations profiled were seeded from Echoing Green. That was a really important moment for us. So it's the idea that there are people out there in the space who are attracting people like you to their cause. And at the end of the day, it's old language. It's social justice. It's social justice language. It's about mobilizing larger and larger groups of people to become a force for change. So I don't know if that's...
It's very helpful. That's very helpful. I just got a very helpful note from Bill White, who said that Billy Shore was going to join us tonight, but he and his wife are... There's a child that's going to arrive any moment now, and so they have a little social enterprise of their own.
Do not tell Rosemary that that's a little enterprise. She thinks it's a big deal.
So with that in mind, let's go to the floor and open this up for a conversation, because many of you are engaged in this issue, and we'd welcome there are microphones here, of course, and here, as we often have. Suzanne Goldstein, why don't you get, Suzanne, are you listening? We want to get you into the conversation. Would you get up here? Yes, we do. You kept on asking me hard questions last year. You can ask these good folks hard questions.
What would you like to know, David?
I want to know what questions you have for them about the future of this movement.
I'm just really happy to be here. I founded SIA 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, and it was with the help of Professor Gergen that I was able to get this organization off the ground and have amazing people come afterwards to run it and get these guys to come and speak to us tonight, so thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges that I see in this world is the three sectors coming together. How do you get for-profit, nonprofit, and government agencies to actually engage in conversation? And perhaps that's someplace where we can talk about.
It's an interesting question. How do you actually get other people engaged in this conversation? Alan, you've been trying at that. You've been working at that.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that is the answer. In fact, I think that the future leaders, I mean, this institution is all about developing leaders. I think that current leaders, and particularly future leaders, are going to be people who are comfortable in all sectors, that can, go from the street corner to the boardroom very comfortably, and to the halls of Congress or the White House. I mean, David's a great example of this. And so I think that is the challenge. I think the way to do it, what I've found is that often, if you can get the business sector and the social sector lined up, I mean, what made us most effective, both in the effort to save America, and I appreciated what David said, but they cut your budget by 80%, you try to save it. So I appreciate what you said about the role that we played. But even when we were first advocating about City Year, the idea of national service, I asked Jeff, will you come down? Because often members of Congress, people in government, listen to business people because they're used to knowing that these folks get results. And then when you can bring a business person to come in and say, look, I'm investing my hard-earned capital, my shareholders' value in this idea, and I believe it's good for the community and good for my business, then they'll agree. So I think if you can build those partnerships between the business sector and the social sector, and then frankly market it back to government, and we got to get a competition going. I think you got to use that old marketplace. I think that this idea of social entrepreneurship right now is sort of where the national service idea was around 1990, where it's just starting to get critical mass. I'm not surprised that you formed this group 2 years ago. We've got a presidential election coming up in 4 years. David knows this better than I do, and it's going to be the first open election, I think, since 1960, where there are really open primaries. Since Vice President Cheney has said he doesn't want to run, there's going to be an open primary process on both sides. So, and there'll be a competition for ideas, and I think candidates will be looking for both the great social entrepreneurs who can be those action tanks, and also for creative thinking about, well, how could government work in a different way? How could we stimulate this? How do we build a stronger partnership and utilize the expertise of all three sectors? I mean, I know for us, the reason we've had any success at City Year is because somehow we've managed to use all three. We started with private sector support. We've had sort of an entrepreneurial nonprofit approach. We built great partnerships in the nonprofit sector and public sector, and then we went to government and used that not to tell us what to do, but to help to provide the financing.
Good, thank you. If you would, please, sir, identify yourself. Thank you for asking a question.
Certainly. Son. Good evening. My name is Rafael Lopez. I'm a mid-career student here at the Kennedy School and a former elected official and a nonprofit executive director in California. And I spent a career, over 10 years, working with low-income communities of color in California. And one of the big challenges that I find in the social entrepreneurship dialogue, both here at Harvard and in general, is that often it's sort of removed from intellectually from what's actually happening in the communities. And there are countless social entrepreneurs who simply don't get recognized for the amazing work they're doing. What advice do you have for those kinds of social entrepreneurs to get on the radar screen of large companies like Timberland, for example, or City Year, or Echoing Green, who have amazing ideas but simply but lack the infrastructure and capacity to be on a national or a statewide radar screen, in fact, to get recognized and be included in these kind of social entrepreneurship planning efforts?
I'll sort of start with Echoing Green's perspective. I think you're absolutely right, and I am the first person of color to run Echoing Green. And it's interesting that social entrepreneurship, as a movement, our legitimacy will be tested if we do not sort of really address the diversity issue head on. We're getting better at it, but we are not there yet. And one of my charges, and I hope one of my legacies when I leave Echoing Green, if I leave Echoing Green, is this idea of the primary importance of a diverse, inclusive community of social entrepreneurs. About 50 to 60% of our fellows are now people of color. Our board is incredibly diverse. We consider ourselves engaged philanthropists, where we very much look to community leaders, academic leaders, business leaders, to vet our proposals, to identify leaders from various communities. So it is a holistic exercise that privileges diversity and inclusiveness first, but we had to make that a priority of the organization. And I will say, when I look at the social entrepreneurship landscape, few organizations have made it a priority the way Echoing Green has. I'm hoping that that will change. It has to change. But I mean, you point to something important, that this really is about access, and how do you gain access to business people? How do you gain access to government? And I think that organizations like Echoing Green will be important intermediaries to give us a platform as leaders of color to get through doors that we don't always get through. So I think it's an important issue, and I'm happy to say that it's one that we've made a priority at Echoing Green.
Yeah, one of the things we need to think about too here is at the county school, whether we ought to do something beyond our students, whether we ought to do something with the community of social entrepreneurs that was a very low cost sort of executive type training programs that can help people deal with some of these questions. I think it's one of the really interesting challenges we face as a school. I don't know how we fund it or how we do it, but it does seem to me that we ought to be reaching out beyond the student body and thinking about issues like that.
And can I just say, it's a pipeline issue on both ends, because California Wellness or California Endowment actually provides a sabbatical program for community leaders of color, because burnout is a real factor here. And folks who would stay in the field for 20 years don't make it that far. So I think you have to look at the pipeline from both ends.
I'm going to go here and then we'll go here. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Marika McCauley. I'm a student here, and I'm also with the Corporate Responsibility Council, another of the co-sponsors of this event. So thank you very much for coming. I came here from the development world, international development, which relies heavily on philanthropy for its work, obviously. So while I'm here at the Kennedy School, what I'm grappling with is the sustainability of that model. And you may see this as a challenge, and I hope you do, because I'm not sure how sustainable it is for these alliances to go forward over the long term when they don't relate to a core business or market-based incentive or need that the initiative is filling. Can you speak to how you could potentially make adjustments, or if you even think it's necessary at all, to bring your work more closely aligned with the interests of people in the business community so that it truly is sustainable and you're not constantly having to articulate the case that we all should really have values and care about people, but that it's actually mutually beneficial in some way?
Interesting question. Alan? Jeff? Well,
I mean, I'll give a thought, which I've actually learned from my good friend Jeff. I think we need, and this builds off of what Jeff first said tonight, we need a consumer revolution. I mean, I've learned from Jeff that the people that he thinks about, I'm not surprised he looked at all your feet when he first walked in here, are the consumers. I mean, at the end of the day, we are in charge. We have the power of our pocketbooks and our wallets. And business will change. More people will do what Jeff Swartz is doing. I mean, he's way ahead. He came to this on his own. But more businesses, they will, I mean, look what's happened with safety. I mean, once consumers started saying they wanted safer cars, well, we've got safer cars.
Organic food.
So, or organic food, or anything. If you look at so I think we need a consumer revolution where we start to say, we are going to choose with our dollars, we're going to choose, among products where businesses have partnerships, where they can, we've got to have, it's got to the point where basically every business has to say, well, who am I partnering with? Who am I supporting? How am I marketing that back? because we as consumers are choosing only to buy from those businesses and then putting our concerns on the table, because you're right, philanthropy will only go so far. And if we could do more, Billy's done this with Share Our Strength, you know, what we've done with Timberland is a model, but every nonprofit, and to the previous point, every single nonprofit, you can do this at the local level with a community business, you can do it at the global level with a global business, but it's got to come from us. We have to, and as we go to work in these companies, we've got to say, hey, what are we doing in terms of social responsibility, in terms of partnerships, and then start demanding. And it can happen because the world is changing, but it's got to start with us sort of demanding it. And you're right, philanthropy won't go far enough, and it won't solve the problems. And at the same time, we've also got to get back to government and say, well, can we use those resources more effectively?
Can I also say, though, that the demand point is a powerful point. The question is, how do you want to frame it? Right? Because the brick through the window in Seattle at the WTO, I know how I react to that, and I know how my fellow branded CEOs react to that. There's a tremendous absence of poetry from this movement, which is an incredible shame. It is an
absence
of poetry from this
poetry.
movement. Yep. There is, you live in the context of poetry, you live in the reality of magnificence. You see young entrepreneurs of color in a town that are transforming, they stand between despair and hope. And that's the milieu you live in, and respectfully, I think you fail to frame it, right? Because you say that we are absent from it and we don't see it. I hear more often that you don't do enough, which is tremendous. That's like my mom saying you should eat your vegetables. It's not the thing that sends me reaching for the succotash. It's very different. If you think about social change, where's the poetry? If you all are living in the midst of poetry, and I think you forget to frame it. And so it's not simply a question of you ought to do, and if you don't do, we won't buy your goods and services. That's powerful, and I don't shy from that. I think pressure leads innovation. But there's also, you have at hand tools that I think sometimes as social entrepreneurs, I don't know, maybe we're just so immersed in what we're doing we can't see it, but all day long, when I had the privilege to go to city or board meetings, we'd get together and we'd have conversations, and boy, we'd debate budgets. And I'd say, time out. Could we start the meeting with a core member? Not a scripted one, not we'll tell you this is what you're supposed to say, but a core member to come in just like you did and say, tell us what you think. And it's unbelievable, opens the mouth of a young person and comes forth poetry. A song of self that blows you away. You think, that's why I'm doing this. That's what the purpose is. That's what the objective. That's what the real value is. Don't get stuck in this conversation about metrics, because I mean you can get all twisted up on that one. Put a young person standing, you know, in the context of a boardroom and blow the joint away. I think we forget to frame the access to the miraculous that we live inside in this revolution.
Shalom.
Shalom Sar from the Center for Public Leadership. I have a question for Jeff and then for Cheryl and Alan. How do you deal with individuals who penetrate through your organization and don't share the vision and values? And I am reflecting on Levi Strauss, who in fact started to hire people who did not share the values and eventually found itself in economic distress and as well walking away from its social responsibility. So how do you deal with them when you find out that you made a mistake in your hiring? And the question to Cheryl and Alan, how do you sustain the fire? How do you keep that passion going when we know that people eventually get tired? What do you do to rejuvenate?
You want to get the first one?
I'll try. Timberland is a community, and at the centerpiece of everything we do, the centerpiece model is you cannot talk about building the beloved community if you don't live it, right? And so while we fail miserably to live this notion of the beloved community, we don't lose track ever of that's what our standard is, that's what our mission is supposed to be. If we can't be it, we can't talk about it, we can't talk to others about it. And so in the context of being a beloved community, there are tremendous issues of inclusivity, including people who say, you know, I got my CPA, and what I really want to do is get my CPA plus, and what I really want to do is build a wealth profile for my family, and I'm not interested in this hug a tree stuff. And that's okay. In the context of inclusivity, there has to be tension, because absent tension, I think frankly the bigger problem at Levi's, there wasn't enough tension. Right? I think there was too much saying, you bet boss, right? And you bet boss Listen, I am the boss, and so if you say, you bet boss, we have a problem, because I know what an idiot I am. I need to have the constructive tension of real community where people speak truth to power. And so there, I get far more conversation about what's wrong with the path of service than how it's ennobled people's lives. I hear much more from people how frustrated they are with our environmental stewardship aspirations as opposed to performance. To me, building the tension of genuine community into how you operate as a for-profit business is the single point of competitive distinction between our enterprise, our family's enterprise, and some that we compete with. You have got to create the genuine, and I learned this from Alan, I learned this from watching CDR operate as a raucous place. It's never quiet and organized. It's vibrant to the point of I could use some aspirin, but it is incredibly generative. Now, that isn't corporate standard organizational behavior. Okay, great, but neither are results corporate and standard either. I believe that you have to live the values that you seek, to see enacted, and we're trying very hard to do that with, some mixed success.
How do you maintain a level of passion? Cheryl?
I'll say two things that are relevant to Echoing Green's experience. I say number one, Echoing Green's power is in many ways due to its network that is now 400 plus strong. So like-minded social change agents who come together in community. I think for-profit entrepreneurs would say the same thing as social entrepreneurs. It is a lonely, difficult enterprise. And you in many ways feel you are out there in the wilderness, and there is nothing more sustaining than to be able to call a like-minded social entrepreneur who has been where you've been, who has confronted the challenges that you are about to confront. The other thing I will say is not forgetting the role of spirituality and balance in doing this work. We funded a woman, Claudia Horowitz, who started an organization called Stone Circles a number of years ago. She is a spiritual activist, and what we find when we bring our social entrepreneurs together, they are less and less interested in getting yet another workshop on a balance sheet or yet another session on, how do I get my audit together. They want a work-life balance session. How do I continue to do this work for the long haul? And it's about spiritual balance, it's about love, it's about community, and that has become more and more important as our community has grown over the years.
I would echo everything Cheryl said. I would just add a couple of things. One, for me, I'm very privileged because I work with incredible people, and what sustains me is getting access to young people like Kim, who David just. We teach our core members frontmost, centermost, meaning take the center seat in the front row, and you got busted for doing that. So thank you for doing that.
You absolutely rock.
I do roundtables with our core members at least once a month, so I can stay in touch with what we're really doing. That definitely keeps me going. I get to work with an incredible group of colleagues who keep me going. I also took a year, with Jeff's support, when he was chair of the board of CDR, I took a year's leave with Jeff's support, first of all, as the chair, and the support of my partner, Michael, and others. And, that was a year of personal renewal for me. And, Jeff mentioned and Dave mentioned we're opening CDR in South Africa. I was first there 9 years ago, and that's now 9 years later a result of that leave. But, because I was burning out, and I recognized it. And I also wanted the organization to have a chance to grow without me, and it did significantly by me leaving that year on so many levels. So I think at the end of the day, you've got to take responsibility for your own renewal, and I do it through community. And the other thing for me is, I was privileged to become a father just 3 years ago, and my daughter is just, the biggest source of renewal, because no matter, she doesn't know what kind of day it's been, whether it's been good or bad, and, when I come home, she yells, "Daddy," and I love you, and that's incredible. So, but making the time for that. I mean, both my wife, who's also an incredible social entrepreneur and another big source of my inspiration, we've had to adjust that whole work-family balance. I mean, we got to be home one of us has to be home by 6:30 every night, and that's been good for us as social entrepreneurs.
This conversation is going to be one that's going to continue for a long time, and I hope will grow in the Kennedy School. We're going to take one more question because the time has run out here, but I wanted to come here, sir, and then I'm going to come over to that young lady from City here to close it off for final thoughts. But here, it's going to go here. You're going to have the final thought, but here, first question.
Hi, my name is Sean. I'm a Kennedy student. I found it interesting that you all mentioned the idea of a social capital market. I'm actually writing my thesis on this, so I'm going to ask for a little bit of advice. What do you think the sector can do to change the capital allocation process to make it more for socially driven value? Currently, nonprofits that attract capital aren't always the best They just appear to be good.
Mm-hmm.
They manipulate their numbers on tax forms and things like that. And I think that's a big reason why you have no really large-scale nonprofits over 20 million. What do you think the sector can do to change that?
I'm so glad you're writing your thesis. Can you send me a copy?
You want to go over to City Year and talk to those good folks.
I would just have one thought. I'm not sure this is what you're looking at, but I think we have to segment the giving market the way the business world has. I mean, in business, you've got startup capital that comes from venture capitalists or angel investors. You've got investment banks that do, mezzanine financing. You've got small business administration. The government's in this game too. And then you've got the ability to go public. And and different people do different stages. In philanthropy, foundations often will give grants as small as $1,000 up to $1 million. And they're doing, it's all, so you don't build expertise in looking at, can you really evaluate, well, what stage, and, I'm looking at Kim, who's at New Profit, which is the organization that my wife Vanessa started. She's working at a certain stage, and you can see it. Organizations go through stages, and they have different issues, and they need different kind of financing. I think if more of philanthropy did that, so we're going to focus on the organizations that are in startup, like Echo and Green is the best in the country at startup stage, absolutely the best. We're going to focus on that second stage. We're going to focus on larger stage and start to bring that same kind of discipline that we have in the for-profit world. That would start to move things, because then people would answer the next level of questions with what should you look for and what do you need?
I can only say that I see only about 2 trillion proposals for investment, and the standard form is, dear friend, I need some, send some, love, another well-intended soul. And it's called an investment proposal, but it isn't, right? Because I've made investment proposals, and it starts with, here's how I'll pay your money back, or here's how you'll earn a return if you'll invest in my plan. And here's the metrics, here's the outcomes that you can measure. And I know that the origin of relationship with City Year was about philanthropy. And we made one philanthropic investment in City Year. We've invested $20 million of shareholder funds over the lifetime of this partnership so far, and only the first $50,000 was philanthropy. Everything else is not done through a foundation at Timberland. It's not covered in a philanthropic line item. It's covered as a business investment, and it's couched in the context and syntax of an investment which demands, right, in a symmetrical, tonic-dominant music way, it demands the notion of return. And it's something that stuns me. And I embarrassed my friend just a tiny bit. We went on a sales call once to one of these big high-tech companies, and it was a startup company. It was a humongous company on the West Coast, so big, so fast that they had conference rooms without chairs or tables. That's how big they were going. And we found ourselves in this room because we are the prepared guys like you could never see. And I said, Alan, what are we doing here? He said, we're raising money. I said, who are these people? And he told me the name of the company. And he said, here we sit, ready, set, go. And so the senior finance person says, Alan, tell us about City Year. And Alan went into, here's what we want, here's what we need. And it was great because it was 2 of us. So I listened. And I watched the faces of these sort of very rich .com trillionaires thinking, aha, I can do a good thing. And I waited till I got to a certain point. I said, let me tell you something. This is only half of our pitch, right? The what you give us, let me tell you what we'll give you. Knocked them on their, well, knocked them backwards. They were surprised. They were surprised that there was even implicit or in the notion of what we offer. We can't be begging for capital. That's not a market system. That's the redistribution of value. Please, I think we forget all the time, social entrepreneurs create value without limit, and without such value, the earth would stop spinning on its axis, and we start with, please, without you, we'll fail. Another way to start that sales is without us, you'll fail. Right? Let's have a conversation about how we can create value together. That's an investment process. Not, here's what you can do for me. Here's what we can do together that must be done. Join me. And it's not simply glib. I think it's absolutely important. Otherwise, people are in the mode of, you have a bad relationship. Anyway, sorry, I talked too much.
Okay. We're going to give you the last word. Not a question, but just a thought about what the experience has been for you in City Year. What has it meant to you?
It's been challenging, but it's definitely been worth it. I knew when I applied that I would be challenged. I knew that it would be a hard year for me, but I'd still do it again. And I think Kim feels the same way. I think Alex feels the same way. It's been worth it, and I can't wait to graduate.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, one more round of applause for these good folks, and to invite them back. Invite them back. Thank you.
Hopefully you got a bite.